The rape convictions of two high school students over the weekend are apparently just the beginning in Ohio. That from prosecutors there. Now they're looking into whether there was a cover-up, and maybe on a wide scale, one that could have involved, they say, other teenagers, plus powerful coaches, and a football team that is an enormous part of life in a small Ohio town. Yesterday, juvenile court judge convicted these two high school football players of raping a 16-year-old girl at a booze-fueled party. The victim said she was so drunk she didn't even know she'd been assaulted until the pictures and the text messages started making the rounds on the next day. The two defendants broke down in tears at the verdict, one of them sobbing that his life was over, before he apologized to the victim's family.
I would like to apologize to you because I had no intentions to do anything like that. I'm sorry to put you guys through this. That is not...
Well, the judge sentenced that teen to at least a year in juvenile lockup. His co-defendant got at least 2 years for also sending around the pictures of the naked and underage victim. But now Ohio's Attorney General says a grand jury will convene to investigate whether other people should face charges. And the list, quite frankly, is long. Mike Tobin with the news. He's in the town of Steubenville, Ohio. Mike, where does this go from here?
Well, Shepard, there were many witnesses to this rape, and there are 16 people who refuse to cooperate with the investigation. That is why Attorney General Mike DeWine wants to convene a grand jury to compel those people to talk on the record. Following that, the determination can be made about additional charges. DeWine is making it clear that he wants to send a message with this case.
What's even more shocking and appalling is that crimes of sexual assault are occurring every Friday night, every Saturday night, across this country.
Now, DeWine is not predicting severe charges will result. He told me he's looking at low-level misdemeanors, things like failure to report a crime. Shep?
Sometimes cases like this might make headlines because there's so much to show regarding these cases. In this case, there was a lot of really cruel internet postings involved.
Yeah, and those internet postings and the nasty language over the internet have not stopped, Shepard. In fact, they have renewed following the verdict. Much of the nasty language directed toward the victim in the case. In fact, the sheriff and the Bureau of Criminal Investigations have been called in now because people are getting on Twitter and making threats of physical harm toward that girl.
Shortly after the verdict, shortly after the AG's office spoke, more threats come over against the victim. One specifically we're looking at is where it was a direct threat of homicide to the victim. Now, this can't be tolerated.
Now, the sheriff says without all of those mean-spirited internet posts, investigators probably would have never gotten the leads they needed to obtain the conviction, but those internet traffic, all of that internet traffic continues today, Shepard.
Mike Tobin on scene in Steubenville, Ohio. Mike, thanks. Let's get some legal analysis now. The defense attorney, Anahita Sedaghatfar, is with us live this afternoon. Anahita, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
With the understanding of the reality that we're talking about the perpetrators of a crime who are two very popular in a small town, football lovers. These are two teenage football players, and now the internet postings and the threats against this young girl who was the victim. It's hard to imagine that it's come to this.
Yeah, I mean, Shep, this ordeal is far from over, and that Attorney General certainly didn't waste any time publicly announcing that he is rightly going to convene a grand jury here. I mean, aside from the party goers, I think there were over 40 of them, 16 of which have refused to cooperate to date with authorities. We have alcohol being served to minors in at least 2 homes, by adults presumably. And let's not forget that there are allegations that school authorities and even coaches knew of this alleged assault early on and failed to report it, failed to do anything at all, and that is a crime under Ohio law.
And that was a distinction I was going to point out. In some places, failure to report is a very lesser crime. In some cases, it's not a crime at all. But in Ohio, somebody in authority, like a football coach, if you know of an abuse, especially a felonious abuse of someone like this, you're required by law to report it.
Absolutely. You're required by law to report it. And even if you're not required by law, you would have a moral obligation to do something, and nothing was done. And I think the Attorney General is being very clear that they are not going to conclude this case until every stone has been turned, until they certainly make sure that everyone that did something wrong will be prosecuted. And a grand jury will be convened. They're going to hear all of this evidence, and all that's required is for that grand jury to find probable cause that a crime was committed in order for them to issue an indictment, Shep.
You mentioned,
and I think,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's okay. And I think another point that you mentioned that needs to be highlighted is the role of social media here. I think it's a double-edged sword in these cases because, on the one hand, if it weren't for these tweets and Facebook posts and photos, we may have never known that this crime was committed, and these defendants may have never been convicted. But at the same time, we see, potential witnesses being threatened. They're going to be intimidated to come and testify. We've seen authorities threatened, and that poses a threat to our criminal justice system.
Anahita Sedaghatfar with us on this very complicated and now expanding case. Anahita, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well.